You turn with me to John chapter 5. John chapter 5. As you're doing that, just a little bit of kind of heads up for the next number of weeks. Next week, we're going to be stepping out of our Walking with Jesus series. It's our Christmas time of the year, and so we'll have weekly Advent readings, doing some candle lighting, taking place on Sunday mornings, and stepping into a new series. It's going to be a little bit different kind of Christmas series. The title of the series is titled Unexpected. And we're going to be looking at the lives of the four women who find their way into the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. And so kind of different approach. There's in the lives of those women and in the lives of just the people around them, there's a lot of scandal, a lot of shame, a lot of sin, a lot of redemption, a lot of glory, that God uses messy people for his good. That'd be a good title for a series sometime. But that's where we'll be going next week. Looking forward to that time. So, man, what a sweet season it is. A great opportunity. If you have people in your life that aren't really engaged in church life, a good opportunity to invite people into church life. For Christmas, we'll have a big Christmas Eve service on Christmas Eve. That really throw you, like on December 23rd. Just joking, not December 23rd. On December 24th at 5 o'clock. Man, just good opportunity to invite people into church life. Last week, kind of full disclosure, last week as I was kind of in the trajectory for last Sunday, there had been a passage that I'd kind of been reading through for about a week and a half. We were out the week before, and there was a passage that I was just living in and realized when I got about halfway through last week, not last week, the week before last week. I guess it's just important that I'm tracking. So leading up to last Sunday, I got about halfway through that week and realized I was in the wrong passage. I was like one day kind of at my desk reading, and I looked over at my board, which I told you last week, have a lot of things on my board, but one thing I have is kind of a 3-month run of services, everywhere from who's preaching to leading worship to what's the text and all this stuff. And I looked at last week and went, I am not preparing for that text. What is that text? And as I got into it and was reading through it, if you were here last week, that's the passage where a father comes and finds Jesus, says, my son is sick. He's on the edge of death. I need you to come so that he can be healed. And Jesus really has opportunity there. He sees the miracle that he's looking for and realizes there's more than just the miracle he's looking for. He needs salvation. And he's able to speak into that man's life and says, man, I don't need to be there with you. I can heal him from where I am. Go, your son is healed. And on the way back home, his servants come and meet him and say, hey, your son just all of the sudden got better. And the man goes, when did that happen? And he tells him about the 7th hour. And that man knew in that moment that was the moment that Jesus spoke those words. And we live in a world in desperate need of the miracle of salvation. And as Brandy and I were kind of working our way, kind of that conversation, I let her know, I was like, hey, I've been in the wrong passage. And she's like, well, what are you going to do? Are you just going to go ahead and just kind of go to what you were preaching on? I just couldn't get away from where we were supposed to be. And I think, just on the back end of a very hard week, a text that's for some, it's been you're looking for a miracle, and sometimes you don't get the miracle you're looking for, but that doesn't mean that God's not there and God's not listening. And so we're in the passage that I've kind of been reading for the last 2 to 3 weeks, and you'd be thinking, well, this should be really good, and you'd think that. And so, but it's really good because it's the Word of God, and I'm excited for the text. Kind of in preparation for this morning, because it's a story of a man who has been broken for 38 years. The world around him has forgotten about him, but Jesus engages with him. And I was in the passage this week. It reminded me of a story that I'd heard once. I don't know if the story's true. You might have heard this story before, but we'll kind of approach it like that. Number of years ago, decades ago, on a Sunday morning, there was a church service that was meeting, and the church service was full. It was a busy Sunday morning, and the church in which they were this location that the story mentions was a very put together church. You know what I mean? You know what I mean when I say put together kind of church? Everybody carried themselves the right way. They wore the right things. And on this Sunday morning, it was a busy Sunday, and the service had gotten started, and everybody was seated, and like any good church, it filled up from the back to the front. And even then, do I have any people that you have to sit on an aisle? Like you have to sit on the edge? Anybody? Like last night we went out to Texas Roadhouse, and my family knows when we go sit in a booth, I'm on the get out there. That way if something happens, God can take care of them and I can leave quickly. And that's not true at all. I'd bring brandy. And so, just kidding, Kristen, I'd take you too. Kirkland, you weren't there. Okay. And so, Cole, we would have brought you too. Anyway, I digress. And so I'm just kind of one of those people sitting on the edge. Well, some of you are too. Like the edges feel like that's like prime real estate, and then in the middle a little hard. Anyway, the door's open, everybody's seated. The service has been going on for a little bit of time, and a guy walks in, and he's not put together. He's not a put together kind of guy. Clothes were raggedy, younger man, might not have smelled the best, but he was at church. And it's kind of like the scene from Forrest Gump where Forrest gets on the bus, and the kids are like, seat's taken. You know, which, for those of you that, it's like Ryan Casey's favorite movie. And so there was nowhere to sit. But he kept walking down the aisle kind of looking for a place. And he didn't know better. But he got about 3/4 of the way down, and he didn't have anywhere to sit. So what did he do? He just sat down in the aisle, 3/4 of the way down. And at that point, no one's paying attention to what's going on the platform, kind of like what happens on Sundays here sometimes. And every eye, every mind, every thought is on that young guy that just sat down. And people feel bad for him. They're embarrassed. What's going to happen? And then something happened. And I guess it had to be this way, but there was a very stately gentleman, a little bit advanced in years, who was always put together. He stands up and begins walking down the aisle. And it's very labored as he takes each step. Not in the best physical of health, but everybody knew this man. And people begin to whisper to one another and even say in their minds, it's going to be embarrassing, but it has to happen. The guy just can't sit there. And as the man gets close to as the elderly gentleman gets close to the young man, something happens that no one was expecting to happen. Instead of grabbing him by the arm and saying, hey, we need to find a seat, because maybe he was going to have him come back and sit with him. The man doesn't do that, but he painstakingly makes his way to the ground and sits beside him. May we be a people who see the broken people. In our series, Walking with Jesus, if you walk with Jesus, some interesting things are going to happen to you. One, you're going to begin to understand things the way God would have you to understand them, because they're the way that God understands them. God never understands something wrong. God always understands something right. But you'll also begin to see things the way Jesus sees things. Not just things, you'll begin to see people the way Jesus sees people. Jesus sees people as broken, who he can make unbroken. And that's what happens in this passage. As we look at this man who's been broken for 38 years, Jesus engages him when the rest of the world doesn't. We're going to see something happen. We're going to see that Jesus is more concerned with something when everyone else is concerned with something else. Jesus is more concerned with that man's redemption. This idea of redeeming as being the act of being bought back or rescued from our bondage, our sin, our debt. Only God is able to redeem. Jesus is focused on the redemption, whereas the rest of the people are focused on the rules. When I say rules, I don't mean God's rules. I don't mean truth. Jesus never deviates from the truthfulness of God, but he had no problem deviating from the rules that men had created. So this morning we're looking at this idea, this topic of being redemption focused rather than rules focused. And we'll see that some pretty spectacular things can happen. First, in this passage, we see that Jesus enters into this man's brokenness, and he does so with purpose. Verse number 1 of chapter 5, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades, and in these lay a multiple of individuals, blind, lame, and paralyzed. And so you have this scene where there's this pool there in Jerusalem, and the pool is surrounded by individuals who are not doing very well. In fact, these would have been many of the outcasts in that day. They were lame, they were paralyzed, they had some type of infirmity, and the reason why they're staying there is to be, or in that space by the pool, is they believed that there was something mystical, even miraculous about that pool. If some of your translations will actually, that might have like a parenthetical statement or a statement in block. Some of you, it might be a footnote. And the reason why it shows up there is it found its way in later manuscripts, later translations of the Bible. But what it says there is they were there waiting for the movement. That wasn't something spiritual. That was just me not being able to talk. They were waiting for the moving of the water, for an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was healed of whatever disease he had. And so that's the reason they're there is they believe that when the water moved, if they could get in first, then they would be okay. And that's where this man is that we're getting ready to meet. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" We see that Jesus sees someone that other people would have been ignoring. Perhaps people made you ever had a place that you didn't want to go? It might have been the most beneficial, it might have been the easiest to go through that place, but you didn't want to go through that place, so you made your way around that place. Or maybe there's been a place in a community where you've lived before to where when you drive through, it just doesn't make you feel good about yourself, and so you avoid it at all costs. This pool very well might have been that kind of a place. Because when you're around those who can't help themselves, and understand in this culture, people who would have been suffering from various infirmities, the illnesses, paralyzed, lame, people, there would have been a lot of shame connected to that illness because many people believed that they had deserved it or earned it in some way, shape, or form. Maybe that existed because of sin in their life, and they were getting what they deserved. Regardless of what other people saw about those individuals, Jesus saw those individuals. And Jesus saw that man. The pool was crowded, yet Jesus identified his brokenness, and he comes up to him and he says to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Well, there's a natural answer to that question. What's the answer? Of course I want to be healed. Of course I want to be better. But the question that Jesus asks exposes a desire and a hopelessness that rests deep within the man's heart. The man responds to Jesus, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me. I am alone and unable to get into the pool when the water is stirred." This man had some kind of idea about God, that God was a first come, first serve kind of God. As long as he could get into the water first, then he would be good. But he was alone. No one was there to help him into the water. And perhaps when the water was stirred, he found himself rolling to the water, but someone would get in there before him. Maybe people that had their individuals there by their side were able to get into the water first. This man was alone. This man was desperate. This man was broken. And this man had no solution for his own life. He was incapable of making himself well. And church, I'm here to tell you this morning, that is us. We are incapable of making ourselves well. We can't fix our biggest problem. Our biggest problem is our sin problem. Our sin has separated us from God. And there is no amount of good, no amount of great, no amount of kind that we can do to fix our sin problem. Only the grace of God can fix that problem. And we find ourselves as invalids often trying to make our way into the water, but we're doing so by ourselves, we're doing so under our own power, and we fall short. When Jesus asked the man, do you want to be healed? The answer is absolutely, but I am broken and I am incapable of doing so. I'm so thankful that Jesus meets us where we are. I'm also so thankful that Jesus doesn't leave us there. Instead, he brings about into our lives a work of redemption, a work of transformation that only God can do. But this also serves as a reminder that Jesus doesn't just meet you. Other people need to meet Jesus. And we're part of that story. We're part of that, we're part of that work of bringing people to Jesus. And it's just not always gonna look clean. Because there are many people that might be here this morning, definitely out in our world, who aren't necessarily physically paralyzed, but they are spiritually paralyzed. They have been hurt by people. They've been overlooked by churches. They believe that they have no one, but there is someone that they can have. And there's someone that will radically change and transform their lives. And it's Christ and Christ alone. And up to this point, there's really not too much of a problem. We really haven't run into the redemption over rules kind of thing, but Jesus is about to act. And it's in Jesus acting that he invites scrutiny. And if we follow after Jesus and do the things that Jesus would have us to do, we will do the same. It says there in verse number 8 that Jesus said to him, get up, take up your bed, and walk. Simple words. Have you, by chance, for some people, this might be a very real story for you this morning. Maybe you yourself have suffered with something for a very long time. You might know someone who is incapable for making their way out of the bed any day, let alone on a good day. Could you imagine being by that person's bedside when someone walks into the room and says, get up? It's like, man, you've lost your mind. But Jesus says, get up. Get up. Take up your bed and walk. And immediately this man knows that something has changed. He hasn't been able to move on his own for 38 years. Maybe he started out just a little sick and things got sicker as time went on, but for 38 years he's been carrying this, and Jesus just says, get up. That's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. I mean, if you've ever known of someone that was in maybe a tragic accident, they had some kind of health thing take place to where they were incapable of walking for a long period of time. Whenever you hear the stories of people who are paralyzed, who have regained feeling in their legs, what do they have to learn how to do again? They have to learn how to walk. But for this man, it says in verse number 8 that at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and he walked. He was able to walk in the moment. Not only were his legs physically healed, but there was no atrophy, there were no problems. He was able to move. You ever had your foot fall asleep without you knowing? Like, it's one thing for your foot to fall asleep with you knowing, but your foot to fall asleep without you knowing is a completely different thing. I remember when I was in 7th grade, I was on a choir mission trip to New Orleans, and we were doing backyard Bible clubs during the day, and we were making our way. We were staying at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and we were making our way back to the seminary, and we did kind of one of the clown car things. We all piled into a car, had about 8 seats, and about 14 of us got in. One of those kind of things. And it was just me and a bunch of girls, which may or may not have been strategic. And I piled in. I was kind of like my right leg was kind of propped up. Ended up being by the door, and then more people piled on in. We had about a 30, 45-minute drive back to the school. And we were just having a good time, goofing off, having all kinds of fun. And when we get back to the school and everybody piles out, or falls out, whatever. And then I'm last to get out, and I just go full blown, just take a step out, and I just kind of kept going. Right leg was completely numb, and I didn't know it. and I stepped, and the left leg never caught up. And I just kind of hit the ground. I don't think I broke anything. No, my face doesn't look this way because of that. And like I caught my hands. The car almost ran over my foot. I was so oblivious to kind of what was going on. We were laughing about it. I wasn't hurt. But like that was 30 minutes with my leg elevated, incapable of walking. Jesus says, get up and walk. And what is he able to do? He walks. And so let me ask you, if you haven't walked for 38 years and someone comes to you and says, get up, take your mat and go home, what are you doing? Everything the person tells you, right? Get up, and you're able to get up. Yeah, anything that follows, I'm gonna do. Take your bed and walk, and that's what the guy does. At once he was healed, he took up his bed and he walked. There's just a little problem. And I believe that Jesus was very intentional with two things. One, and this is kind of one big long thing, he was intentional with engaging with this individual. He was intentional in his conversation. He was intentional with the question that he asked. And he was clearly intentional with the thing that he told him. Do you want to be healed? I can't get into the water. Jesus says, get up, take up your mat and walk. And the dude's able to do that very thing. Very intentional, but there's also the day of the week. Because the next little part of verse number 9 reveals the problem. Now that day was the Sabbath. And I believe Jesus was intentional with engaging with this man on this very day. See, the Jews had created a system of misunderstanding. Was the Sabbath to be treated as holy? Absolutely. But the Jewish religious leaders had come in and they had created guardrails in order to help people do that. And while it helped them do things, the very thing that it didn't do is help people experience God. Instead, they were thinking that they could do things on their own. We've already established you can't do good enough on your own. Jesus healed this man on the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, real quick, I believe that a lot of people would have known who this guy was. And it appears from the rest of the story that a lot of these things are happening in real time, that the moment this man stands up, picks up his mat, and starts walking, that's when he's engaged with people or engaged by people. So if you've known someone that hasn't walked for 38 years and like for real, so like we're sitting here in a worship service, anybody willing to say they have someone in their life that has been suffering from something for decades? Or have you ever known someone that suffered from something for decades? They are incapable of doing things on their own. And imagine right now in the middle of the service, if you hear the doors open up in the back, and what's gonna happen? If you hear the doors open, what's everybody gonna do? I'll see, some of y'all you're scared. Some of you actually looked. Now, if you hear the doors opening, you're gonna look. Or if other people look, then you're gonna look. It's like, and imagine you looking back and seeing the very person who you've known that hasn't moved out of a bed for 20 years walking in like nothing happened. You're just gonna be like, hey, church started at 10:40, come back later. No, you're gonna go like bonkers. You're gonna go absolutely crazy because someone who's not supposed to be walking walks in here as if nothing wrong has happened. And what do the people see? People see him and they're so elated that they look at him and say, it's the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed. Man, what a sweet bunch of church people. Like those are the kind of people that you pray will move their membership. No, I mean, for real, if someone's gonna be that, look at someone and they don't care about what God has done. They just care about things not going their way. And they go to church somewhere. He answered them. The man who healed me. He didn't give in. He didn't go, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. His life's been radically changed and transformed. The man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. And I was able to do so I was going to say yes. They asked him, who's the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? And he realized he didn't know who it was. Notice back when Jesus said, hey, listen, do you want to be healed? How did he respond to him? He's like, sir, I can't get into the water. He didn't know who Jesus was. Jesus was engaging him in conversation. He engaged back. He doesn't know who Jesus is here. The man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn as there was a crowd in the place. He had no idea what happened. Jesus acts in this man's life, and what does it do? It brings about this scrutiny. People are upset that Jesus has healed somebody because it's the Sabbath. They're not elated the fact that Jesus could heal somebody. Not a person there who engaged that man had the ability to tell him to get up, pick up his mat, and walk. Yet they're upset over the fact that he's carrying his mat. Why? Because they were not focused on redemption over rules. They were more about rules over redemption. Do things our way. We couldn't care less about the outcome. And that's such a dangerous, dark place to find ourselves, where we care more about the way that we have decided to do it than the way, the truth, and the life. If we're not careful, church, we can become so committed to our preferences and our policies that we miss the very mission of God. And it's always been God's mission, is to see dead people raised to life. That should be our mission, because it's God's mission, which is why we should be so careful to make sure that the things that we put in place don't stand in the way of God and don't keep people from God. And if the story ends here, it'd be like, that was interesting. But it goes on, because here's the thing. The man's been physically healed. He needs to realize, though, that there's something else. Remember last week, the Father needed more than just his miracle. He needed the miraculous, life-altering, eternity-altering salvation that only God can provide. This man needs the same. So it says in verse number 14, afterward Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." Jesus calls this man to live a transformed life because he knows that the man's greatest danger is not physical paralysis, but spiritual death. Great, you're well. Sin no more, so that nothing worse will happen. What worse could happen than paralysis? Eternity separated from God. That's way worse. And so the man only has one response, really. It's an obedience that flows out of the change that he'd experienced. This obedience to testify to the goodness and the greatness of God. After Jesus finds him, he tells him, "Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. By the way, it just wasn't any old man, it was Jesus. And this is where the conflict just becomes very real between the religious leaders and Christ, because they took issue with him. It says, verse number 16, "And this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath." I believe very intentionally so. Why would Jesus do that? Because verse number 17, Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." Hey, translation, God's mission of redemption never takes a day off. The goal at the end of the day is not to follow a set of man-made rules. The goal that all of our lives need instead is this: to be radically transformed by God's grace. That is our need. And God, thankfully, God doesn't take days off. When can God save somebody? Anytime. It's not just a Sunday morning thing. You've heard me tell the story before of a lady that called her pastor like halfway through the week and said it's like 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. Says, I got to get up to the church. You got to meet me up at the church. She's like, whoa, what's going on? What's going on? I got to get saved. He's like, that could be a phone conversation. Now God doesn't just save people here. He doesn't just save people on Sundays. In fact, Most of the time, in the stories of the lives of people that I've engaged with, most of the time, people aren't saved on Sunday morning in a church. They're saved somewhere during the week where someone who is a follower of Jesus engages them with the truthfulness of God and calls them to reject their sin, to cry out to God and say, God, forgive me and cover me with your grace. That's when people find themselves stepping into salvation. Why is that? Because God has empowered you. If you're a follower of Jesus, as Greg was talking about, you've been filled with the Spirit of God, and you take that Spirit of God with you everywhere that you go. And the moment that God inclines upon your heart to open your mouth and to speak truth, you're able to do so. Not because of something you've done, but because of God through you and in you. That's when lives are radically changed. We want to be about God's mission. His mission must be our mission. And it's not a mission to maintain rules, but instead it's a mission to vigorously, with great excitement and passion, to carry out the mission to see dead people brought to life. So let me leave you with this morning. A few things for you to consider. And please know this. I don't have something in my head. This isn't I can preach this sermon and then we can get something out of it, kind of thing. I don't have anything rolling around in my head of examples of, man, we need to fix something. I'm so thankful for Emmanuel and for a people that, I believe if the person were to walk in, now they'd be really late. That's fine. It's like the person that says, they go to the service without music. It's like, we don't have services without music. You're just never on time. Like, no kidding. That's never happened to me here. No kidding. I was at a church one time. And I was like, we had 3 services. And I asked the person, it's like, hey, what service do you go to? They're like, the one without music. I'm like, yeah, we don't have one of those. But if right now, if someone, that's a true story. I can't make that stuff up. If someone were to walk in right now and maybe come in late, they couldn't find a seat, but they're trying to find a place. I believe Emmanuel's the kind of place where people would start scooting over saying, hey, just come sit by me. And I hope they wouldn't get very far down the aisle. But hey, come sit by me. I believe Emmanuel's the kind of place where people can walk up here on a Sunday morning at the end of a service or near the end of a service and weep openly before God and find hands upon their backs of people praying for them. I believe this is that kind of a place. So I'm so thankful for Emmanuel. But here's where we have to be careful, and we can constantly recheck ourselves. And here's a few things that I think align us with Jesus and his heart. One is to make sure that we're focused on people instead of programs. There's not a program in this world that needs to be saved by Jesus. But the world is filled with people who do. Our focus should always be people over programs. When we come here on Sunday mornings, for the most part, we're here to equip the saints to go out and do the work of the gospel. But to go out and find people who are in desperate need of salvation. People over programs have to be our focus. We need to be focused on mission over maintenance. Our goal here at Emmanuel Baptist Church is not just to make it to next week, but to passionately and vigorously carry out the mission that God has set before us. Which means if we're going to have the heart of Jesus, I believe our focus needs to be on redemption over rules. If we have something in place here at Emmanuel that keeps people from Jesus, we need to get rid of it. Anybody disagree? Like I said, I don't have anything in mind. If I were to know of something right now that's keeping people from Jesus, hey, we're making that, just full disclosure, we're making that change this week. Because we're not going to do that. I don't know, but we always have to be on the lookout because we can so quickly create something that will do that very thing. That's what the religious leaders of Jesus' day were doing. I don't think they were doing anything maliciously against God. They just got to the point to where they thought that their way was the best way. They just kind of created their own God in their minds, and that's who they were satisfying, not the one true God. If we were to receive something today and realize that we've been wrong the entire time, what should we do? We should quickly fix it and change it. We could go through our history of things that have existed throughout the history of the church that we thought was okay at one point and we realize now we were desperately wrong on that. And very little of it is doctrine and theology. Most of it is practice. But our rules must never supersede the truthfulness and the redeeming power of God. Which means walking with Jesus means choosing his mission even when it might create some cultural tension or even tension within the church. We don't actively seek to cause disagreement. But if we know we're not being truthful to God, what should we always aim to be? Truthful to the things of God. So let me ask you a few questions for you to consider. These are for you, not for the person next to you. So if I see Casey elbow Michaela, I'm going to call him out on it. It's like, man, I think God's laid it on my heart that you need to do this. That's not. Here are a few questions. They're going to be in the I voice, but I want you to do the same. Where have I allowed religious tradition to overshadow God's mission? And I think a follow-up question to that one could be, what barriers have I put up that keep people from Jesus? Who in here had to get really, really good before God would save you? It was one of those times it's okay not to raise your hands. Good job. Ask yourself this question: who's the lame person, the individual near me, someone overlooked whom Jesus wants me to see? Who's the 38-year-long invalid in your life that maybe you've quit seeing? Anybody in here have something that's broken at their house that they no longer see? Like one day you opened a door a little bit too fast and there's now a doorknob-shaped hole in your wall, but you've seen it so many times you don't see it anymore until like one of your kids decides to point it out. Who's the person in your life that you have a hard time seeing that you need Jesus to help you see again? Ask yourself, am I willing to obey Jesus even if it disrupts my comfort, my preferences, my tradition, my expectations? By the way, preferences and traditions in and of themselves aren't bad. They're really not. They only go sideways when they supersede the things of God and when they close our heart off to God's things. And then ask yourself this question: does my life show that I am joining God in his work of redemption? Does redemption supersede the rules in my life? I'm going to invite you to bow your heads and close your eyes. Maintain a posture of prayer as the praise team comes up and leads us in a final song of response. I just want you to ask those questions in your head. Where have I allowed religious tradition to overshadow God's mission? Who's the person near me that Jesus wants me to see? Am I willing to obey Christ even when it disrupts the comforts, the expectations in my own life? And does my life show that I'm joining the Father in his work of redemption? Father, we cry out to you this morning, desperate for you and such need of you. And God, I ask now that there would be a revelation in our hearts, a revelation that demands a response. If there's someone here this morning where it's being revealed to them this morning that they are not a follower of Jesus, that they are living a life of sin far from you, God, I pray this morning they'll be convinced and convicted of their sin. And that they'll cry out to you, asking you to forgive them of their sin, knowing that you are faithful and just to forgive them and to cleanse them from all unrighteousness. God, I pray today will be the day of salvation. God, reveal that in people's lives. If they need to say yes to you this morning, God, I pray here in just a little bit, they'll go public with that. They'll grab me. They'll talk to somebody else and say, God, I need Jesus today. But Father, for those who are following after you this morning, God, we need revelation in our life. God, what are the things in our life that we have elevated to the point to where it's almost like they're scripture? Yet they might go right against the very thing that you've called us to do. God, we know that when Jesus told the man to pick up his bed and to walk, he wasn't telling him to do something that was sin. People just misunderstood it to be so. So God, reveal in our lives the things that are out of balance. God, reveal in our hearts the people around us that are in need of the good news. They need to hear about a God who loves them and who can save them. God, maybe a word of hope to someone who's near to us, who needs to hear about the beautiful redemption that can come into their lives. So, Father, as you reveal yourself, Father, I pray we will be a people of action and that we'll respond by saying yes to you. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Church, I invite you to stand as we respond to the Lord. I'll be down here. Would love to pray with you. If you need to come and treat these steps kind of as an altar and spend some time in prayer, I can guarantee someone will come alongside you and pray with you. But don't miss the opportunity to respond to the Lord.